working now. Yes. Sorry, recording folks. Hopefully this recording works. We'll see afterwards, but I'm gonna try to have all the events recorded as well, so in future if you can't make it, you can still watch these. But either way, you're like, what do I actually need to start making games, right? It seems very daunting, but in my opinion, you need an idea, working computer, and some motivation. This last one is very important. You need motivation to want to do that. And that's it. That's basically nothing, right? So I know a lot of people have this impression that making games is a lot of programming, and it's very programming heavy. And there are engines where you can utilize your programming skills to do some really cool things, but in my opinion, it's like these languages are so specific to the game engine that if you have a coding background, it will help you to understand the new language. But if you're learning it from scratch, you can learn it from scratch. Because like, let's say me as a programmer, I know all these programming languages. When I was starting to learn Unity, I was like, it has all this Unity specific stuff that I have to learn how that works, right? And there's also, I'll go into it, but there's engines that help you create visually, where essentially it's like a lot of drag and drop. And so you don't need a lot of programming knowledge to start things, right? So I want folks to know that. Yeah. So, some cool places to learn. These are online course sites, kind of. So we have Coursera here. These are also, these are like online courses basically. And then you look at me and you're like, Liz, I'm already a college student and I already have 4 courses and I'm too tired. I'm tired to do this. I mean, if you're really passionate, this is the place to go. And you could also do it over winter break. You could. A lot of these are also self-paced, so you can just do like 20 minutes a day, and get it done eventually. Or you can kind of do a whole lot over winter break, and then do nothing for spring semester, and then a whole lot during the summer as well. Which is what I love about this. I took a bunch of Coursera courses to learn Unity. So also, I'm pretty sure I forget how, but you can have extra access with SUNY. So these are all free to a degree. It's kind of like you can audit all of these classes for free, which I personally love because it's free knowledge. And then I think you get you can pay for a certificate or pay for some extra exams to test your knowledge, but that's not required. So I think the SUNY access gives you that kind of here's homework and tests to quiz yourself. There's also Udemy, which is super popular. So Coursera and also EDX there. Those are courses from other universities, like Harvard has courses on EDX that you can take, right? Udemy is cool because anybody can submit a course, and I think because of that, it's a lot more popular. You have more of a community, because I can go and make a course. I mean, obviously, who's going to take it? I don't know. But you have folks who are not exactly professors, but they are professionals, and so they post courses online and they update them very, very frequently. And so this one is from Coursera. So for example, CalArts has this thing called Specialization, which is a sequence of courses to do game design. This one's on Udemy for Unreal, and this one's on EDX for Harvard. And some YouTube channels. So this is in case you're interested not only in tutorials, but also just game development stuff in general. My personal favorite is Game Maker's Toolkit, which is this top one. Mark Brown, one person, he does a lot of game analysis on various topics. So for example, here, there's how to become a game designer and the power of video game HUDs. But he also talks about stuff like accessibility. He analyzes different video games. He talks to game professionals. He has a series also on developing a video game because he essentially is going through the process of making an indie game in Unity, and so he is kind of cataloging his experience. So it's very interesting to see him talk about various game development aspects. There's also Brackeys, which is this one. Lots of really good Unity and also just coding general tutorials. So this one's more tutorial in nature. So for example, post-processing in Unity. Very respected in the tutorial community. And these are all links, by the way, the underline. So if you want to look at the slides, you can click to go to these channels. We have the Game Developers Conference, or GDC. That's, I believe, every March of every year. And essentially it's kind of like TED Talks, but for professionals, or journals, scientific journals, where it's hey, I learned this new stuff, I'm going to talk about it for 30 minutes. And so it's really cool to see what's the newest thing, but they don't do just they do analysis videos, they do kind of new technology videos, but they also do anything regarding game development. So for example, here it's burnout in games, how can we fix that, how can we work on that? So I personally really like it, and also It's something that they're usually 30 minutes or 1 hour. I like to kind of put on the background while I'm cooking, and then I learn some new things. So I personally like that. And that's also interesting, more specifically for folks who want to do stuff professional, right? And then this last one is another kind of niche, but I found it just recently, and I think they make very high quality videos, is kind of journalism on things relating to game development. So these are two videos that I watched that I liked. So the one they talked about like culture at Valve and how the Valve company is structured and kind of some struggles in there, and like, you know, they did interviews with folks that worked at the company. And another one is, for example, Roblox and how Roblox exploits young kids game developers. Kind of not good. But that's interesting, again, if you are just interested in game development as like a sphere and as a culture, right? So one last thing, which is not quite exactly like a research to learn, but it's useful during the game development and learning process, are things called game jams. So essentially, a game jam is you create a brand new game within a short time span. It's typically 48 hours, but you could have and you usually have a theme, but not all the time. And they can be any amount of hours or any amount of time. So for example, this is the itch.io page, which has a whole bunch of them. For example, you have this schedule here. So for example, tomorrow we have all these, themed horror game jam number 15 starting tomorrow. And it tells you how many people joined. So for example, that one is 30 days, this one's 7 days, and so on. There's one that I found that's 0 hours, because you have to make a game within 1 hour during daylight savings time. So when daylight savings resets, you made a game within 0 hours. So you have stuff like that. There's a lot on itch.io, but not all of them. So for example, Ludum Dare is one that, again, that's a link. That's also a really popular one, sprouted a lot of games from that game jam. And then also we are planning to have one with this club in November, tentatively for the second week.
Yeah.
Right. So
the 10th through the 12th.
Yeah. So we're gonna hammer out the details soon, but we're gonna have one, and essentially it's gonna be roughly 48 hours. So it's gonna be like that weekend, Friday night to Sunday evening in November. So if you guys are interested, that's happening here on campus. And then. Okay, so I want to really quickly talk also, because I think it's really cool, game jams, and then games that sprouted from those game jams. So for example, Hollow Knight, this lovely 2D Metroidvania platformer that a lot of people know about, indie game, was also kind of, not directly came from, but very inspired by Hungry Knight, which, as you can see, the character art and the kind of the world came from that game jam. So I also provided links on the game and also the game jam. Then we also have Binding of Isaac. Binding of Isaac was made within 7 days, and then the guy was like, yeah, this is pretty cool, we put it on Steam, nobody's gonna download this, and then it got really popular, and he's like, wow, this is a Flash game. I wanna do more with this, what can I do? And so he partnered with a game development company, and they remade it for Binding of Isaac Rebirth, which is also on Steam now. Full release with lots of cool extra stuff. And then also another one is Celeste. So if you guys have heard of the very difficult platformer, was actually first made in a game engine called Pico 8, which is a kind of small pixelated kind of engine, super cute. But that was originally called Celeste, and then when they remade it in this nice enhanced version, that one was renamed Celeste Classic. And that one actually appears as like an Easter egg minigame in the full release, which I think is pretty cool. So that's some resources and some links about where you can learn. And again, as you were like, as I mentioned, it's a lot of motivation of like kind of self-teaching, self-learning in a way, because games are so diverse. You have so many different genres, you have different ways to create them. Everybody has their own process. You have different game engines, right? So like 2D, 3D, VR, stuff like that. So in a way, the club facilitates and helps you guys make those games, but because everybody's so different, it's gonna end up in a way that like, okay, I have to go and look up how to do this, right? And obviously like our clubs kind of like hammer the stuff, where do I go? But that's why it's kind of like motivation to want to teach yourself is pretty important in my opinion. So let's say you have an idea and you have motivation and you're like, I want to do this, I'm gonna do all those online courses, I'm gonna watch all these tutorials, and this is what I'm gonna do 24/7. So you have your idea and you're like, I can see it in my head. Super Mario 2.3.4, right? I want to make it. So in my, opinion, again, this is all kind of a little bit biased towards me, but it really helps a lot to choose a game engine, right? So I'll go over exactly what it is. So in a way, it's kind of like a program with a bunch of stuff built in to help you make the game. So if you think how Photoshop helps you make artwork, right? It doesn't make artwork itself, but it has a bunch of tools to help you make art. Game engines help you make games, right? So you have a lot of things like level editors or like animators, right, with the curves and everything like that. So you have a bunch of tools built in, and a lot of stuff like tiny details like physics and stuff and memory management that it takes care of for you, which is amazing. Again, this is a little GIF in Unity of like the physics engine working, where essentially they have this cylinder, sphere, and cube, and all they did was they created that object, and they told the engine, hey, this is a physics object, and then it does all this on its own. So you don't have to, you don't have to program your own physics. That would be very terrible. So I'm going to go over a couple of popular game engines, starting with Unity, which I've been mentioning a lot, and you're like, what the heck, what is she talking about? So it's a game engine. It's really, really popular. In my opinion, it's best for 2D games. So a lot of people, when they look at popular game engines, like, I want to do 2D, I'm going to use Unity. It's great for small games, and it does export to web browser games. So the ones that I made, you can play on the browser, which is really cool in my opinion because you don't have to download anything. It also has very great and excellent tools for VR and AR. So in the future, if you're working on a VR project, most likely they're going to be using Unity, or just if you want to kind of go that path in any way. I believe people also use VR and AR not just for gaming, but like for various other learning tools. So you have people that do like different like medical simulations like in Unity, which I think is pretty cool. And this one for programmer friends uses C#, which is like an object-oriented, similar to Java. And these are some screenshots from the engine. What's up?
I'm just, as you're wrapping up the Unity thing, I want to ask, what about the current situation with Unity?
Okay, so the current situation with Unity, basically they had a whole thing. Unity's been great for a lot of developers, but they recently changed their policy to include a bunch of more fees, and everybody got really mad because it's like, hey, what the heck, why are you saying that before everything's free and now you're taking a chunk of our money? And also it was not fun because they were like, yeah, this applies to every Unity game made ever, and like not to like just the new ones. And so people were like, hey, this is what the hell. But then they were like, oh, we're taking that back actually. We're not doing that anymore. And so yeah, they did change it, and essentially I think now it's you get to choose between a per install or a royalty basis, and it's only for like really high big games, right, that make a lot of money. And also I think before, when you made games with Unity for like as a hobby, there was like a little splash screen that came up that said made with Unity, and you couldn't get rid of it if it was a free version. But now, as a little candy, they were like, you can make games without the splash screen. So now it doesn't say made with Unity. So yeah, there's a whole thing with Unity, and everyone's like, Unity's dead now. But hopefully it's not, because a lot of people love this engine, including me. What's up?
And what about Godot in that case?
I'm going to talk about Godot. Yes, Godot. I don't know how to pronounce it. I actually looked it up. There's no one pronunciation. But next one. Next one.
I
Oh,
heard Godot.
good. Yeah, Godot or Godot. I don't know.
Godot.
Godot. Just some quick games made in Unity. We have Genshin, Hollow Knight, I've mentioned before, Beat Saber again VR, Cuphead, just some examples. But for example, you might have folks that like Genshin would probably have to pay some fees now, but they make way too much money. So now we have another very popular engine, Unreal. So whenever you look up online like what game engine to use, you're gonna see Unity and Unreal come up everywhere, right? So obviously I'm gonna talk about it. My opinion is best for 3D. They do have 2D support with some overhead, because essentially how Unity 2D works is that everything is 3D, but it's just so like nicely, neatly hidden that it looks two-dimensional, right? So it's kind of like you have to set that up in Unreal, because it's essentially designed for 3D, right? And so that's why I say it's the best for 3D. It has, it's made for AAA in mind. So you have a lot of AAA companies and games that you see on Steam for $60 that use Unreal. So that's why it excels at really big projects and really ambitious projects. But it might seem a little overkill if you are just throwing out and you're like, what the heck is all this? It's kind of like when you have all these features, but then it seems a little overwhelming because you don't need all those extra features, right? Also, really cool thing, in my opinion, is the photorealism that they have. They've done a lot of really cool effort with like ray tracing and graphics and stuff. And so Unreal is also used in stuff like VFX and CGI for movies. So you might bump into people using Unreal for that, right? So that would be pretty cool if you're interested in computer graphics or going into film industry and stuff like that. Another cool thing with Unreal though is you have visual scripting called Blueprints. So again, what I mentioned before is that if you're not super tech savvy, you're not a great programmer, but you want to make games, Blueprints would be very useful, for you because it's essentially programming, but you just drag and drop stuff, very useful. And the back end of this uses C++. And these are this is like what the Blueprints looks like, and that's a screen grab of Unreal. And then I talk about some games, which you guys know, Fortnite. It's made by Epic Games, so obviously it uses Unreal. We have Sea of Thieves, an indie game, Borderlands, and Kingdom Hearts 3 uses Unreal as well, which I think is pretty cool.
I was just gonna say, is there a performance gap between the Blueprints versus car coding in C++ or no?
That's a good question. I don't think so. I don't think so because I know from looking at job postings, for companies that use Unreal, like they expect you to use Blueprints. So like you have AAA companies that use Blueprints on the job. So I would imagine that it doesn't. I can do more research into that though because I personally never use Unreal. It's on my to-do list. So I can look into it if you're interested. But I don't think so. Because that would make a lot of sense. Another one is GameMaker. So also 2D, all kind of pixel art in a way, but GameMaker is very great for non-programmers. They have also a really nice visual scripting language here, and it's a bit smaller, but it is still free. So all of these that I'm talking about are free to use. So it's just kind of a matter of preference. Just kind of maybe taking a look at games that have been made in this engine, and like I want to make something like that, so you can use that engine. This one is simple and fast, which might be a little limiting for like really, really large projects. But again, if you're just kind of starting out and you want to learn something, you're not too great with programming, and you want to make something kind of like cute, 2D, pixel art kind of stuff, then this is the engine. This one does not have 3D. So like Unity and Unreal both can do 2D and 3D, but this one just does 2D. And this one uses the GameMaker language if you want to do like proper coding in it. And then there's some games made in GameMaker, which you guys know. Lots of indie games here. Undertale, Hotline Miami, Katana Zero, and Hyper Light Drifter. I love all these. So maybe I should look into GameMaker. I know before it was paid, but now it's free, so it's pretty awesome. And then another one that I want to point out, people have said, Godot, this one with the robot. It's also great for 2D. So again, another great 2D. As you can see, a lot of also beginning game development usually takes place in 2D because you have to worry about one less dimension, which kind of helps out usually with kind of everything. But this one's great also so Godot is great for programmers in general. So you have a lot of the engine exposed to you as a programmer, so you can fiddle with a whole bunch of different stuff. It's completely open source, which I think is pretty cool. So if you want to contribute to Godot, you can on GitHub. It has a built-in IDE, so essentially you don't have to download any Visual Studio like you do with Unity. So again, very programmer friendly. And it supports multiple programming languages like C, C++, C#, and the Godot script or GD script. These are some screen grabs from that.
Oh,
Sorry. No, you're good. And some games, so Godot is not super duper popular. I mean, it is popular because it's very, user friendly and indie friendly, but you don't see a lot of AAA games made in the engine, right? So you have some friends here. I saw online that one of the Sonic games apparently was made in Godot, Sonic Color or something like that. I don't know if
I think the remake of Sonic Colors was for some reason.
Yeah, but at the same time, I kind of looked into it, and with people taking a look at how the game runs, people suspect it's a very heavily modified version of Godot, so I didn't put it on the list for that reason. But that's pretty cool. Hopefully we get to see more of this engine in the AAA space. I think that'd be awesome. And then there's a lot more. So I only talked about 4, and you'll see that Unity and Unreal are the most popular when you look stuff up. So you can choose one of those. We are going to have workshops in Unity specifically, but you can find small, obscure ones that work the best for you. So I love this list personally. This is from a Game Jam description page, and they have a bunch of different are you interested in this genre or this programming language or something like that? So for example, Pico 8 is not super duper duper popular, but the Celeste game jam was made in Pico 8, which is, you know, cute looking if you want to make stuff really, really retro. And then another thing to keep in mind, especially for game engines, is just like the community size, because essentially it comes down to, can you find tutorials and can you find questions to your answers online? Because if you find something that's like super duper obscure or like really small, you might have like a question that you just can't find answers to. So that's one benefit to using one of the game engines that I kind of highlighted, right? So I think, yeah, that's it for the game engines section. Does anybody have any questions so far about anything? Comments or concerns? Okay, awesome. So I just wanted to quickly cover, also what time is it?
It's
Okay. Talk quickly about the general development pipeline. So this is kind of taking my experience from Treyarch as well, from like professional game development, but also just my experience and from watching a lot of different videos online about like recommendations and tips and stuff like that. I'm like, hey, what should I do to make a game? This is like the general pipeline, all the different steps. So we have, first you have your idea. Makes sense, like I want to make this. I want to make Flappy Bird, but with Sonic instead. And then you have your outline, so you kind of have like a rough idea of like, okay, I want this to happen, then this to happen, and so on. Then you have your prototype, which I'll get into, which is like a really rough programmed version of your game. Then the actual full set of requirements. Then you develop all those requirements. So after the requirements, you don't add a lot of new things. You fully make the game. And then at the last step is polish, which I never get to. I need to make a game where I can actually polish it. Yeah. So first of all is your idea, which makes sense. So it could be anything. In my experience, it's helpful to clone an existing game, which I showed at the very beginning, right? I definitely did not remake Asteroids in Unity. I did not do that. But it's really cool to see a game that I really like, for example, Hollow Knight as well, which is a game that I kind of made with my like platformer. It's like, oh, I'm just gonna make Hollow Knight in Unity. But it's really helpful to just recreate something that you like in a game engine to learn that game engine, right? To not get super overwhelmed with like, oh my god, what if I do this or that or that? It can get, it's easy that way. You can also put a twist on a game or genre you like. So for example, Undertale, it's like, okay, it's a JRPG, but what if the monsters have feelings and thoughts and stories? What if killing the monsters to get XP felt bad? So that's kind of like where that core concept comes from, right? Which is what I like a lot. But you can also have into one crisp core concept. So for example, Celeste doesn't really have like a twist, at least in my opinion. This is also all of my personal analysis. But for Celeste, it's a 2D platformer, but it's like just great. People love it because it's difficult, right? So if you have skilled 2D platformers, they love Celeste. So that's kind of their core concept, right? Is that like anybody can play it, but then when it gets to like near the end of the level, especially with that like extra levels, it's like, it's hard. I did not do that. For Power Wash Simulator, also, like it's a simulator. It's kind of like, what if this thing in real life was a video game? That could be something, right? That you have all those truck driving simulators online. People buy those. I don't know. You can make something like that. And you're like, what if I'm University Student Simulator? I don't know, making like a really boring game. This cat. That's the core concept. You play as a cat. That's kind of awesome. I mean, that's it, right? So it's kind of like, that's if you want to make something that's kind of like new that you feel that doesn't exist. You want to put out in the world. Or again, when you are just starting out, it's like, I'm going to recreate Mario. Super simple, right? You have your idea. Now, what do you do with your idea? In my opinion, the next thing is to kind of have a rough outline. So, what are you envisioning for the game? So, in the example of, let's say, Flappy Bird, for example, you have like your start menu. So, you want to imagine like, is it 2D, 3D, genres, the core mechanics, like what am I actually making, right? The overall game flow. So, for example, for Flappy Bird, I'm going to imagine it's going to be 2D, it's a mobile game, so it's going to be very vertical. At the very beginning when it loads, like I have all these buttons. When I click start, the bird starts following or something, I don't know, there's maybe a little pop that tells you to tap on the screen. And then the main game mechanic is that you tap on the screen. And then you have these, the pipes that go across the screen. And that's kind of your main mechanics, right? It's a very, very simple example, of course. But that's gonna be like, okay, what you have in your head, you write it out. And obviously this is not like a hard requirement, but I find it helpful. So this is this is my outline for the games that I made. So 2D Metroidvania platformer, double jump glider. That's it. That's kind of the outline, right? Let the cat in a bag. Stop cats from killing themselves. Like that's the other one that I made, right? It could be anything you want, by the way. Like it could be a to-do list. It could be Comic Sans. It could be on Post-it notes. I just recommend that you write it out so that you have a clear idea of what you want. Because from my experiences, you have an idea, but then you don't know where it starts and where it ends, right? Once you have your outline, you're gonna create a prototype. Right. So, prototype, I highly recommend this, and I need to do it myself as well because I haven't made a game with a prototype yet. Actually, I think it just kind of happens naturally during development, but it's nice to have its own, to kind of be aware of it, to have its own name. Essentially, a prototype, the goal of it is to test out if your idea works or not, right? So, it can also help generate new ideas, but essentially, it's a very, very rough game that you made. Like it's a game, you can play it, it does what your outline says that it does, but it's just like really rough. It's gonna be really ugly, it's gonna be temporary assets. But you wanna finalize your game design. So your game design, that's a link, but it's kind of just anything regarding the rules of your game, right? So this is an example of Ori and the Blind Forest, which is an indie 2D platformer. At the top is a prototype for a level, and then the bottom is the actual final game. So it might be hard to see on the projector. We have like this character here, and then this crow, and then this kind of like actual level, right, where you fall down. So in the final game, you have this beautiful art, right? This is kind of ugly, but you can see the idea. And then here, it's actually like, okay, you have the bird here, the main character, and then the same like chasm, right? So you can see how the actual level design kind of stayed in the end, but here you can get the idea. So that's the goal of the prototype. And actually, yes, I'm gonna switch over. I want to scrub through this YouTube video. So this is actually like where I got the screenshots from to showcase some prototype stuff. So just real quick. So if it's like you can understand the idea again. That's the goal of this, is that you have like blue background. You have your level is black squares. The main character is a white rectangle. But it's to get the feel of it down, right? Like how fast does the character move? How did the enemies react? How far did the enemies fling themselves, right? And then you can see it in the final game where it looks amazing, but the core of it stayed the same, right? So let's see what they talk about. So yeah, this is their concept. I don't even know if this is actually in an engine. It kind of looks like it was made like, oh gosh, in like a video editing thing. I think this is where I got the crow one. Yeah. Okay, but you guys can watch all of this if you're interested. And then another one is God of War, another prototype. And then you're like, this is God of War. It's so ugly. Yes, and also I do say, like, again, being an internet tryhard, a lot of what you're working on looks like this because you have a lot of like cleanup. Like a lot of the artists probably look at the final example, but as a game designer specifically, like this is the game design step, right? And so I see a lot of this where it's just like gray tiles on the floor. You have just your trees, and then this is the step like, okay, what moves can I do? How do the trees react? What does the enemy do? So this is where you want to finalize those things, because essentially the reason why you want to do this prototype is because you want your game to feel good and fun before you spend the time and energy to make it look really pretty, especially if you are creating artwork and music, I don't know, like artwork from scratch, right? Because you can have a game that looks really, 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 really pretty, but if it's not fun, who would want to play it, right? So it's kind of like, that's why this is important. Also, this is pretty long. But here's like the showcase in the end, where the stuff that you just saw like kind of stayed. Maybe it was changed slightly, but now you have the nice, pretty level around it. Oh, greatness waits. Okay, let's see. Go! Okay. Now you see. Awesome. So, you have your prototype done. The game feels great, but it looks ugly. But now you want to actually finish it. So what do? So this is a step of what I call requirements, but it's kind of like your outline, but with like everything written down. So you have a need to have list and a nice to have list. especially if you're doing a game jam where it's like you have a short time limit, like 48 hours. I think this is crucial because for both games that I made for game jams, I've had so many ideas, and I'm like, okay, let me just put this on the nice to have list. Do I need this for the game to actually be finished, right? So the need to have is, this is, if I do this list, the game will be done. I will consider the game to be done when I have this list done. Then, you know, for all the games that I've made, like, oh, it'd be so cool to have this and this and this. I'm like, okay, no, that's the nice to have list. Let me tell you, both times I've never gotten to my nice to have list. I just finished the need to have list and I pulled all nighters to finish them. So, you know, that's more so a time crunch, but it's just great to know, again, here, when you're done, because you might have an idea and you have your prototype and your concept, but you might have something called scope creep, which is used for like project management. But essentially it's like, oh, here's like my project, like this is what I'm doing. It's like, oh, this would be cool to add this in. Okay, let me just add this thing in. Like, okay, let me just add this tiny thing in. Oh, it'd be so cool to have this thing too. Then it just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and suddenly you're working on the same game for 2 years, and you're like, okay, is it even done, right? So that's like more easily avoided if you have something that's kind of like, again, a list, and you don't want to change it too much unless it's like your nice to have list after this step. So this is my list from the games that I've made. I think this is just a Google Doc and this is a Google spreadsheet. So it doesn't have to be anything super fancy, but it's just a nice thing of like, okay, this is what I'm making. Okay, right.
Sorry.
Then, now you actually develop your game. So this is the biggest step in my opinion after your prototype. This is where you're actually making everything. So you want to finalize all your code because you're going to probably do a lot of your coding, or if you're partnering up with programmers, a lot of your code during the prototype phase. So here it's like, okay, let's finish it up, let's make it maybe nicer and you know, better object-oriented, you know, practices, stuff like that. And then here you need to, because your prototype is ugly, here you want to make it pretty. And so you have to create the assets or find them. Oh, I forgot to, there's one more link. There's a cool website online. I think it's called freegameart.org, I believe. But essentially, it's a bunch of copyright-free artwork that's made for game development, or not only artwork, but also like sounds and stuff like that. So I'll provide this link before I share this with you guys, which because I've used that, I think it's very useful. So you can find a lot of cool assets online. They might not be exactly what you're envisioning, but if you're again just making something from scratch just to test out your knowledge, that might be very useful. And so you have a bunch of things. These are the folders of the assets that I use for my games. There's a lot of stuff that you might not think about, like sound effects or visual effects, right? So it's kind of like, let's say you're pressing a button. So here, you have a button. You have one sprite when the button normally, one sprite when you're hovering over the button, and then one sprite when you're clicking on the button. You might not really think about that when you have your idea. So this is a very useful, during the requirements phase as well as when you want to write all of those out, like think about like if I made this from scratch, what would I need? So this is the really long step. But hopefully after this step, you're kind of done with your game in a way. Like you can say like, oh, this is, again, you can follow your requirements list. I have this done, it's complete. So then last step would be kind of to polish it up. Right? Yep. So then this is the step that I never really get to, but we try our best. So as it says here, it could be kind of thought of just the end of development, depending on what you say is a requirement or not a requirement. But essentially it's kind of just giving it that nice shine at the end, right? So taking it from like really good to amazing. So you have this extra oomph. And so I want to point out this is from JMTK's Platformer Toolkit online, which you guys can play around with. But you have this amazing 2D platformer at the top, right? And it runs great, it feels great, you have all your sprites. So you have, this is just the player jumping, and then this kind of extra oomph comes from the, if you compare it to the bottom, where here, the character kind of squashes when it jumps and when it lands, right? And they have this little particle effect with the little white circles of when it, runs and jumps and lands. And then also, very slightly, the character leans forward when it runs. And so if you compare the two, it's the actual mechanics are the same, right? So the actual code of moving the character is the same, but you have this kind of extra like appeal on the lower one. And this depends, of course, on the genre that you're making. So this would be something with the squash and stretch. Maybe in like a pixel art game, you wouldn't want that, depending on what you're envisioning. But this is like an example of what I mean by polish, where it's not exactly required for the game to be done, but it does kind of make it more professional in a way. And I never get to it, so this is advice that I should be taking as well. Okay, and then we'll just review real quick. You have your idea, then the rough outline. Then you create your prototype, which could just kind of be, so in a way, for example, if you think about it, and also if you're on a time crunch, the outline and then the requirements sometimes can like blend together, because like this is a list and this is kind of a list. So you might just jump to requirements. You know exactly what you want in your game. And same thing with the prototype and the developer, right? If you jump directly to, I know exactly what I want in my game, I'm gonna start making it, you kind of just, you want, from my experience, is like you just start making it, but you just do it with temporary assets at the very beginning, because you just want to throw some ideas down, you want to see how it feels. And then you start kind of, okay, I have this done, let me put the assets in. Okay, I have this part done, let me put the assets in. So it can, of course, it can blend. Of course, people leave out the polish step, so that's totally fine. But this is a general outline that I think is helpful and that I try to follow as well, and I would want to follow. And also from my experience of like watching YouTube videos and stuff, this is what people recommend as well. And then let's see. Okay, so last thing I want to mention, essentially that was the talk that I wanted to give about how to start making your games. So you have your like knowing where to learn things, then you have your game engines, and then you have the development pipeline. I briefly want to talk about the Unity workshops, which are like future events, where we have planned so far, is what I have in the works is 5 sessions up to an hour and a half, depending on the exact curriculum and how much I want to get done and how fast people kind of pick up the material. But essentially they're going to be Thursday nights. We're trying to get rooms from 7 to 8:30, at most. These will all also, of course, be announced in the Discord and emails sent out if you have like listservs and stuff like that. But essentially, this is a screenshot of the game. I'm making the game. All the artwork is made by me. All the code is made by me. The one thing I don't do is sound effects and music, sadly. I guess I should start doing that. But essentially, it's a Mario-esque 2D platformer with levels. So it's going to be, my goal is we have one level, we have all this cool stuff. So you have your character is going to move around and jump. You have, you have your ground with, it's cool like tiling, so you can't tell, it's seamless. You have this turtle enemy thing. I don't know, it has spikes, so it hurts you. You have like cool, assets like clouds in the background. You have health pickups. Then you have like a health bar, and then you can't see it because it's like the beginning of the level. I just took a screenshot of the game. But there's also like a flag post at the end, and so like you reach your goal, right? So it's like similar to, again, cloning a Mario game. So it's not anything too exciting, but in my opinion, it teaches a lot of core aspects, right? So it's like, how do I make things move? How do I have communication between 2 objects, like collisions, right? How do I make ground so that my player doesn't fall through the map? How do I make stuff that's just background and decorative? How do I have this, again, this is like a collision, like how do I pick up this health? How do I have UI elements like my hearts that don't interact with my game at all, right? So it's kind of like a lot of these core things that in my opinion are useful and will kind of kickstart your knowledge in Unity. And obviously it's completely from scratch. I want to have it recorded, again, fingers crossed, because we'll see how the recording of today comes out. So if you can't make it to those, you could find it online, and then I will share that with you guys as well. And then, and also the other thing is I mentioned the game jam that we have in November, and so we have 5 sessions and not more or less, because I want to do as much as I can with you guys before the game jam. So my goal is, if you are interested in doing this game jam, right, your very first one, 48 hours, what can you make? But again, you have no experience. My goal with these workshops is to help you guys prepare and feel confident enough to participate in the game jam, because I think that'll be pretty cool if you can join and make something within like 2 days. So that's the outline for the workshops, and more details and specifics will go out through the Discord and stuff like that. And then I think that's it for me. Yeah. So I know it's a lot of talking, so I'm so sorry that it's a lecture, but the workshops will obviously be more interactive. And then if there's any other types of events, you guys will obviously hear about it. But we have the VGA Discord, so the game development group is part of the VGA. So we have this URL here, and there's also QR codes here for the Discord, the Instagram, and so on. But essentially, we have our own section in the Discord, and it's like we have like an announcements channel, and then also like a general. And so if you're interested in, again, kind of you want to learn game development in your own time, but then also you're like, hey, I'm stuck on this, or like, hey, what do you guys think of this? Kind of like just an open forum type thing. Feel free to join, and all these links as well for like all the slides and recordings will go out on there as well. So feel free to join for that. And that's all I have for you guys.